Good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are. As Executive Director of Resilience First, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar organised by Resilience First. For those of you who were unable to view the opening video, Resilience First mission is to help to build resilience across business communities, whether those communities be defined by geography or special interest. Please do visit our website, www.resiliencefirst.co.uk, to see the many projects and events we organise in an effort to help you understand and apply resilience. We've recently formed a strategic partnership with another organisation called the Resilient Shift, so both our reach and output have expanded, we hope, for the greater good. The theme of today's webinar is flexible working, sometimes referred to as hybrid or distributed working. It was a theme of a guide we issued at the start of this year in partnership with Russell-Cooke, and one that you can access via our website. The guide remains a timely publication that looked at changes to people, to places, and to processes, as well as new tools. We think about a post-COVID-19 recovery. The guide provides some indication of our long road to recovery, and we all are struggling to understand quite how long that recovery will be. The pandemic has certainly accelerated trends in flexible working that have been discernible for some time. To the surprise of many, and with the help of the internet, the new working arrangements have largely been successful for the majority of organisations, if not for all employees. COVID-19 has also highlighted one essential but often overlooked ingredient of resilience, namely adaptation. We have adapted to a crisis situation beyond our immediate control and found that the sky has not fallen in on that old saying. In fact, companies and communities and individuals have pulled together in many positive and novel ways. The big question now is how the office will look and be managed in the future, and organisations are finding different answers to making the hybrid office work for them and their employees. So to help us shed some light on this dynamic topic, I'm delighted to welcome three speakers who have all contributed to the published guide, and they have experience in the legal, the building design, and technology professions. To lead us through the proceedings, I'm pleased that the chairman of Resilience First will also chair this afternoon's session. And Simon has kindly written the foreword to the guide, and today we'll offer some opening remarks by way of scene setting, and we'll then introduce the other speakers today. Throughout the session, I encourage all listening to ask questions of the speakers by posting hopefully brief questions in the chat box to the right of your screen. Please do ask those questions throughout the session, and we can all see them as they appear. I'm sure the chair will pick as many of them as he can in the Q&A session towards the end of the session. Simon, the virtual floor is yours. Thank you.
Robert, thank you very much, and hello everybody. As Robert said, it's my privilege to chair Resilience First, but also to chair this webinar, which deals with the important topical theme of flexible working. Resilience First exists to convene, debate and share best practice among businesses and the communities in which those businesses operate, and also government and all forms of government agencies. So really to pull together themes, discussions and convene around best practice in resilience. Over the last year, of course, we've been busy, and they say that necessity is the mother of invention, and that's certainly been true for businesses and society around COVID. Last year, I think, if we talked about flexible working, when I say last year, I mean sort of pre-COVID, if we talked about flexible working, we'd have talked about a growing trend to look at flexibility. We'd have talked about things in well-being, in efficiency for companies, and definitely for the sort of flexibility to attract a more diverse talent pool. But I don't think we'd have predicted that it's become what it has today, which is frankly the new normal for working. Remote working has just become normal, and that shows what businesses really best at: brilliant resilience, leadership, and innovation, sometimes on the back foot. But what we really want to get into today is, of course, what's next. A few personal observations. Well, one personal observation really. When we started, the boardrooms, the companies, the businesses that I'm part of and have discussions with, I think needing to work remotely and flexibly was just dropped on us from a great height. Then I think businesses and leaders realized it was long term. It wasn't just going to go away in a matter of weeks. Then I saw, these are all my own personal characterizations, I saw a phrase of going, okay, we're out of denial now, let's embrace it, let's make it as good as possible. And then I think we went into a situation around second lockdown of that's it, the workplace is dead. And thoughts about ghost office blocks and everything forever. I don't know about other people. It'd be interesting to get views as we go through this webinar, but I'm definitely getting a gradual and growing envisaging of a return to some sort of hybrid normal. Lots of people are using the various phrases like hybrid normal, where actually there is a clamour to get back, a clamour from people, a clamour from businesses. To what shape, to what extent, I don't know, and there's lots of complexity. That needs decoding for us, that needs experts, and that's exactly what we've got today, grouped around really the people aspects of flexibility, the workplaces, and also the tools and processes that will be needed as we, I suppose, reinvent a long-term flexible working. Now, there's three speakers, as Robert said. You've had all their bios. I won't go through them one by one. I'd rather the time was with them talking to us. So we'll get straight into it. We start with Kizzy Augustin, who is a partner, an employment lawyer and partner at Russell-Cooke, who, as Robert said, have very kindly worked with us on this. So no further ado, Kizzy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. And just to clarify, I'm not an employment lawyer. I do cover probably some employment issues, particularly in my field of expertise, which is health and safety. And as Simon and Robert have helpfully said, I did have some input, particularly in relation to the people and the place aspects of the guide. And something that we certainly looked at is the acceleration of the shift towards remote or home working as a result of the COVID pandemic, and the potential legal, practical, and perhaps other issues that some others will talk about in respect of remote or home working, or even that mixed hybrid approach to working post-pandemic. Now, for me in particular, when we're looking at the way in which I as a lawyer can help businesses from a health and safety perspective, even if employers are grappling with the idea of whether or not they should fully support home working on a full-time basis, or for many others it would be more about reopening offices and how do we do that safely and efficiently. Regardless of either option, for my purposes, you have to think of the health and safety considerations and obligations that are owed by businesses to their employees and others that use their facilities or conduct activities on their behalf. And I split that as part of the guide into, I think, 4 or 5 different sections. One is a reminder of the legal health and safety obligations in respect of home working, remote working, and even working in the office. What workstations and equipment are necessary in order to facilitate that, and whether that has to be ergonomic or otherwise. Employee engagement, mental health and well-being, and the implications of getting straightforward health and safety obligations wrong. So just to expand on some of those themes, which are the things that I covered in the guide, when we talk about the legal obligations, some of you will already know this, but as a reminder, we already have obligations under the Health and Safety at Work Act, where employers are responsible for securing the health, safety and welfare of its employees in the workplace. And by that, I mean in an office or remotely if that is deemed appropriate. We do have to protect the health and safety of employees and others who might be affected by our business activities. And that includes, depending on your sector, members of the public, visitors to our buildings, and contractors. That obligation to manage health and safety risks includes access to an egress from the office. It involves the use of equipment, but it is covered by this caveat that it only applies to the extent of your control over the building that you are responsible for, and also over the control of the employees that work for you. It's also caveated by this phrase reasonable practicability, which means you don't have to do absolutely everything possible to secure the health and safety and welfare of those relevant people, but it's doing what's reasonable in the circumstances to make sure that your employees and others affected by your activities are protected but from anything that causes them harm, and effectively controlling the risks to injury or health that could arise as a result of your request to carry out work activities on the business's behalf. That is fed into by the requirement to prepare a risk assessment. So very often we talk a lot about risk assess. It's extremely important even now during the COVID period, which means you have to assess what risks might arise as a result of the working arrangements you wish to put in place, to enable you to better inform your policies, better inform the working arrangements that you wish to put in place, and also to engage employees on fulfilling those obligations that you have as an overarching business. That might mean making sure employees have the tools that they need to work safely and effectively in an office, but more importantly, if they're working remotely or at home. Now, very often people are asking me questions like, do we need to carry out risk assessments on people's homes because we can't go into everybody's houses and making sure that they are sitting at the right desk or have the right chairs? For me, it's more important as a business to ensure that you're doing what's reasonable to reassure yourselves that employees are working effectively and safely at home. And by that, I mean not going into everybody's houses. You can if you want. But what's more important is giving employees the tools, because they also have obligations. I'll come to that in a short moment. But giving them the tools to ensure that they can secure the health and safety of themselves. So that might be by having a dynamic risk assessment that's online, it's accessible, you engage with employees, you talk to them about their setup, you encourage constant communication with employees, and so on and so forth, and then you review the documentation that's generated as a result of that. Now, when it comes to equipment, it can be tricky ground. One question I've had is, do we need to provide specialist equipment for people to work at home? Some of the research that's been done over the last year has suggested that businesses and duty holders might need to do more than they have been doing, because people are admitting that they're working on the floor, they're working on sofas, they're working from their bed. Yeah, even I sometimes do that. And there's more physical strain, as well as some of the mental well-being implications that come around working at home. So the first things first has to be carrying out a workstation assessment under the existing health and safety legislation. Again, I said that can be very simple. You review the equipment that's already in place at home, the furniture being used, what activities are being performed, and any special requirements, particularly for those that are vulnerable. If they're working at home on a long-term basis, and I think we are now in a situation where it's long-term rather than a few weeks, then you do have to have a specific DSE assessment, which is an assessment of the display screen equipment that they're using. And again, it's vital, I think, for employee health and well-being, as well as productivity and job satisfaction, to make sure that adequate assessments are being conducted. There's proper equipment. And I said, it doesn't have to be specialist equipment, but take into account the vulnerabilities of the employees that are working for you. Take the time to review those risk assessments and adapt if necessary, because if you fail to do that as a business, you could be in breach of the law, which means attracting fines, enforcement notices, and basic scrutiny from the Health and Safety Executive, which is the regulator that monitors health and safety compliance. Just dealing with the other bits, employee engagement, the important thing to recognise is that employees themselves also have an obligation under existing health and safety legislation to take care of their own health and safety as well as that of others. Really important to have engagement and communication, consultation with employees to make sure that any development of your policies and practices is well received and that employees feel included with that, to ensure that they are complying with their duties but also assisting you as a business to comply with yours. Mental health and well-being was a big thing, and it has been for a few years actually now, but never more so has it been more prominent than when we have had to deal with it during the COVID pandemic. It's been really challenging, I think, both for employers and employees to deal with the mental health aspects of working away from our usual workplace environment. And while home working is flexible, it's pretty good for work-life balance, and it certainly helps with some productivity. I think it's unsurprising that some home workers have felt isolated, stressed, fatigued, and isolated, and feelings of loneliness, because you do lose that sort of team camaraderie that you might get if you were in an office. So that's why I say the communication and consultation, keeping in constant contact and having that avenue open, that they feel free to communicate with their employers if there is an issue. Part of that will be risk assessment, but part of that will be your overall approach to working remotely and how you manage any concerns or potential complaints that they might have. And lastly, cost implications. What's the worst that can happen? Well, as I say, the Health and Safety Executive is the regulator that deals with health and safety compliance for organisations and individuals. And essentially, they're still carrying out spot checks on businesses who are conducting hybrid working, making sure that if you have people in offices, they are COVID secure. If they identify employers that are not doing the right thing or taking all reasonable steps to ensure that risks are mitigated, then they will come down relatively heavily by way of issuing fines, by way of enforcement action and potential prosecution. So I think that's really important for businesses to understand that, but also those who are senior in the business, who have some influence over making decisions on health and safety, could also be ultimately responsible in their personal capacity if they are making decisions that negate or neglect their health and safety responsibilities. So lots to think about. Health and safety, as I said, I've never been more popular as I have been during the COVID pandemic, but really important to understand your obligations as a business, making sure that you reiterate those to your employees and keep the communication ongoing to deal with ongoing and dynamic risks. I think that's it from me.
Kizzy, thank you very much. I'm conscious that's twice now I've committed the grievous wrong of calling you an employment lawyer. So I don't know whether the third occasion will earn me a letter before action.
That's all right. I forgive you.
Thank you. And Kizzy, thank you. That's given us a great start with the sort of people aspects of flexible working. We move now more to the sort of physical workspace aspects, and for that we're joined by Natalie Smith, who's an associate principal and workplace strategy director at Perkins and Will. Natalie, we're fascinated about workplaces. Over to you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. And I have a slide which I'm sharing because what I do is very tangible, let's say. So, we are working with organizations primarily with people in corporate offices, understanding, what will the return to office look like as a result of COVID. And what we're seeing through our research is that people are really missing this sense of belonging and sense of community. So whilst there has been, effectiveness, let's say, in productivity whilst working from home over the last 13 months, it's been this more human side that we're missing out on. When we start to look at survey results, data, and these are from the Perkins and Will data set, but actually when you look at this consistently across any survey, you start to see some very strong patterns. There are some very positive things that people are reporting as a result of working from home and as a result of future abilities to have a hybrid work model where time is split between home and the office. Work-life balance. If we think back a few years ago, this was constantly something everyone was striving for. It was, how can we get work-life balance in our corporate busy lives? And actually the ability to be able to work from home and have autonomy over tasks has given people that. I think the well-being comes with a double-edged sword. We've locked it, people not being able to access the community in the way they have been, but actually projecting that there will be some well-being and elements and benefits there. But actually the things that people are lacking, if you look at the bottom areas there around culture, sense of belonging, team identity, informal interaction, and career growth. And, it makes us start to think, well, what becomes the role of the office? Because really, they're the reasons why you choose to work at a company. They're the reasons why you stay at a company. So the office itself needs to really deliver as a place whereby you can have this sense of belonging, whereby you can feel the culture, whereby you can have that mentorship and learning. We're talking a lot about the hybrid model. I think just taking a pause to think about what that hybrid model is. It's about being able to work in different locations, depending on what's right for your role, depending on what's right for the tasks you're completing, and also what's right for your team and your clients. So, sort of thinking much wider outside of just the what's right for you hat, perhaps. And, it is this spread between home, between office, between client site, and then between those third space community areas, whether they be cafes, libraries, co-working type spaces. And, this does, with results of COVID, does have an impact on how we do all these things. And Kizzy's just touched very much on the home element. I'm going to touch on the office piece a lot in the next few minutes. But also client side, a lot of organizations, professional services firms who would traditionally have a large portion of their teams on client side are, starting to even consider, will that change, with potential shrinking office footprints, and sort of restrictions perhaps on number of people in the building, will that be pushed back into the office or pushed to home? And then how will this benefit our local neighborhoods and where we choose to work? So we start to think, why will we go to the office? A building is a place to achieve things, and it's about growth. It's about connection to brand. It's about community and collaboration. I think these are incredibly important things that have come out over the last year. That social aspect that we all have to how we work, and obviously the resources, the focus work. Recognizing that not everyone has a dedicated place where they can work effectively from home. And on the right-hand side, it starts to question these offices that we were in previously that were, rows and rows of desks, what we would call me space. Do we start to see a repositioning of that? And actually, you've got less of those me spaces that perhaps you could do that work from home, with then the office starting to have a lot more around the we and all spaces being perhaps those collaboration areas, those even areas for events, for teams or all staff events, where you can start to make sure that when people are in the building, the building is a place whereby you can feel the culture and connect to people. Then in terms of actually reimagining the workplace itself, I think we need to recognize that with the last year has come hyperconnectivity, which has enabled us all to be able to work in this virtual way. But as we start to transition back into the office, and even in a world in social distancing, in a world past social distancing, within the hybrid model, there will be people working remote whilst those are in the office. So the digitalization of the workplace will continue. The need to explore what different varieties of settings may be required in the workplace, perhaps more furniture solutions for the Zoom calls or Teams calls, so that actually those calls can take place without disrupting others at the desk. Perhaps focus areas. So if you do want to do some focus work in the office that can't necessarily be done at home, so we think there'll be a different typology in the workplace. Apologies. There's also been a lot of discussion and debate around the reduction of space as a result of COVID, as a result of home working. And I think, the way we're approaching this is it comes down to who's using the building and why are they using the building. Here's just some personas. They're quite typical, but going from someone who's very office-based to someone who's perhaps more of a homebody. And really this comes down to understanding what are the roles of the different people in the organization, what are they doing in the building, how often do they need to be in the building, and actually mapping those needs against the amount of space, and making quite educated decisions around, you know, making sure that the building, the types of settings that are there, there's enough of them to be able to support the ways that you want your business to work in the long term. I think it's about making some, you know, decisions around what is right for your business in the long term. How do you want people to be working, and what impact will that have on space? We are definitely seeing some organizations downsize to different degrees with regards, you know, in response to increase in home working, but that's not the case across the board. So I think it's just understanding what's right for each business. And then that brings us to the neighborhood, and sort of looking at place outside of the four walls of the office or the home, and starting to think about, you know, what will that mean for the neighborhood. You know, you're sort of seeing people who perhaps have longer commutes, you know, working more within their local areas, working, you know, perhaps the exploration of these co-working creative sort of marketplaces within commuter towns outside of London, and really is sort of coming to life of that neighborhood space. You know, I think the hub and spoke model, let's say, whereby you have these sort of smaller satellite offices, I think is something that's still being explored by organizations. But we're also seeing, you know, individuals who are choosing to work from home themselves for a larger period of time, you know, still perhaps wanting that community environment that comes from just the buzz of being around others, and then themselves going to these sort of co-working spaces. So really, perhaps there's opportunities for this revitalization of our neighborhoods as well. So overall, I think in the world of place, there is a lot happening from, you know, your sort of small home office all the way through up until the neighborhood spectrum. And different people are doing different things. And I really do think it's about making sure it's thinking about long-term solutions in terms of what's right for each individual business. So thank you very much.
Natalie, thank you. So we've got people and the places that they work in. What about the tools, technology, processes that are going to be there or emerge and help us work flexibly? And for that, we're joined by Ian Jones, former General Manager of Intel. Ian, tell us about it.
Thank you, Simon. And it's great to have the opportunity to be part of today's webinar. I can still recall the first reports that trickled into the news channels in January 2020, I guess it was, about a serious respiratory virus appearing in China. It never dawned on me in those early days how much of an impact COVID was going to have on citizens, businesses, and governments around the world. And it's certainly been a salutary lesson in the need to have a just-in-case plan, maintaining businesses, you know, which comprehends all eventualities. At the same time, it's been inspiring to watch how people have adapted in so many ways to cope with such a challenging and often in many cases tragic situation. And of course, technology and tools have been a pivotal part of that process. Thank goodness for the internet and associated devices, software, and applications, which have enabled businesses to continue functioning, at least in some form, at a time when many physical storefronts are closed and face-to-face contact has been impossible. People have become adept at the use of collaboration tools such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams, supporting each other with social media group chats, and of course, remotely accessing their enterprise apps and data to be able to get work done, you know, wherever they are. We have seen virtual technologies accepted into some of the most sensitive and sympathetic environments, areas such as doctor-patient consultations, for example. And that prompted one London GP last year to remark that he witnessed 10 years of change in 1 week with relation to telehealth advances. The pandemic has created a surge in the adoption of digital technologies, which will accelerate digital transformation in all sectors and settings. As the world emerges from COVID constraints, we can expect that flexible hybrid work practices will take hold as business leaders and employees aspire for a model where work can be done anywhere, anytime, enabling business to excel and for people to give of their best. Many people no longer talk of going to work. Indeed, for some, the working day is becoming quite a loose term. Increasingly, people find their own work-life balance, which may include a mix of office time and remote time. To support this, tools, apps, and data need to be available almost ubiquitously, I recall the invitation from the government of Barbados this last winter, inviting people to come and remotely work from the Caribbean. Quite tempting. The definition and the operation of the hybrid workspace will pose questions for business leaders. To preserve the best of all worlds, successful companies will create a strategy for a blended approach to getting work done. And they're likely to consolidate and formalize remote working practices, taking into account that some roles may lean towards being located in the office, specialist labs, for example, while some may be a better fit for a fully flexible mode. And within all this, there are a number of areas in which technology is likely to play out in the post-pandemic workspace. Firstly, improved collaboration technology for home and office. In the global competition for talent, because talent is scarce, companies are likely to invest in advanced technologies which can better replicate the experience of being in the same physical space. For example, high-quality cameras, virtual reality, advanced audio, interactive displays, and cognitive user interfaces such as voice recognition and control. Such technologies can enable a fuller sense of shared experiences, spontaneous human interactions, and relationship building for remote and distributed work patterns. It will be necessary to provide online support and continuous distance learning to ensure that all employees are proficient and feel confident in the use of collaboration tools. And in turn, the tools themselves are incorporating artificial intelligence to learn and anticipate user needs. The pandemic has had a massive associated economic impact, and that's accelerated decisions to deploy automation in production environments. Investment in robotics, artificial intelligence, and 3D printing can help reduce labour costs, but they do impact jobs, manual jobs in particular. Across the business, robotic process automation and advanced business analytics, including automated report generation using natural language generation, can free up resources to focus on higher value tasks. And clearly, we owe it to our people to prepare them for this new world and ensure that all have access to the digital tools and skills they'll need to succeed. Smart building technology will support organisations and employees as they return to the office. Technologies that focus on health and safety will be crucial. Frictionless entry and contactless devices in the office will help prevent cross-contamination, whilst devices to monitor staff and visitors through automatic temperature checks and personalised proximity warnings to maintain social distancing protocols will become more advanced and discreet. Air quality systems will be enhanced to keep air cleaner and manage office airflows to limit the spread of airborne pathogens. Over time, intelligent buildings will further evolve to optimize space management and to anticipate occupants' personal needs, whilst building operators will benefit from energy optimization, equipment maintenance alerts, and remote management. Tools will also play key roles in the supervision, training, and support of employees. Performance and compliance monitoring is a contentious issue, but one that will become prevalent as employees work from different locations without close supervision. Technologies which allow activity monitoring and tracking through sensors could have a place, but will need very careful introduction and operation if staff are not to feel undermined and intruded upon unduly. Employees want to demonstrate they're using their time productively and to be supported in the event that they need additional help, resource, knowledge, or data to get work done. And tools and data should help to pinpoint actionable steps. But equally, there'll be a strong focus on managers adapting their communication styles and the media in response to remote supervision. Online trading has been evolving for many years, often featuring packaged micro-learning modules, which can be consumed anywhere and paused and restarted as needed. And AI software, artificial intelligence software, is emerging which can crunch feedback data to deliver valuable and timely behavioural tips. Virtual reality and augmented reality can be used to simulate hazardous tasks in a realistic, efficient, but safe manner. Technologies which focus on remote well-being will also become important. Headspace is one example of a company that offer an online platform with relaxation techniques for employees. Actions speak louder than words, and good management practice is for leaders to role model downtime For example, some have scheduled daily remote yoga sessions with their teams. Finally, a few words on cybersecurity and digital inclusion. The rush to deploy additional devices and software during the pandemic to support an increased level of remote working will have increased the attack surface for cyber threats. It's really important that cybersecurity has kept pace with the introduction and adoption of that new technology. And that includes both people devices and also Internet of Things solutions. Malicious actors will continue to seek opportunities to disrupt and extort companies that rely on remote working and cloud services without having implemented robust protection. And digital inclusion is an important consideration as we manage through the pandemic and beyond through ensuing digital transformation. As a proportion of employees may not be digitally connected, for example, frontline or service staff, there is a danger of haves and have-nots in tools and skills. The benefits of a digital transformation must extend so that all are connected at the appropriate levels. And this could be via smartphones and apps. Such devices can act as gateways to personalized versions of company systems and will facilitate better communications and wider engagement. Beyond our organizations, programs are needed to ensure communities receive training for all citizens to ensure a resilient national workforce is ready to support the new jobs of the digital era. I'll hand back to Simon.
Ian, thank you. Stay on, and if I can ask Kizzy and Natalie to come back and join us in a panel session, we'll do encourage all audience members on the webinar do use the chat function to give your questions, but I shall leap in first because Ian, just off the back of what you were saying about the increase in AI and robotics and sort of just technology in society and in the workplace, I've often thought to myself that actually AI and sort of the technological leaps at the moment would be enough of a sort of seismic change in the way everybody works without COVID and other factors going on. I mean, when you talk about, you mentioned jobs being sort of lost or crowded out by technology. I mean, one of the things that bothers me is increasing inequality. I mean, do you think it's going to be crowding out, the first generation of robotics was crowding out relatively low skill jobs. Do you think technology is going to be more discriminating in terms of how it crowds out jobs?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it has been a gradual process in terms of it's not as if suddenly factories are moving to being fully automated. I was thinking the other day that I haven't seen a person come to my house to read the meter for a long time because now readings are taken remotely, for example. So I think it's probably more evolutionary in the larger sense, but nevertheless, it is a real challenge and potential opportunity in terms of new job types. But I think the ONS says that I think 1.5 million jobs in the UK could be threatened by automation. On the other hand, I think new jobs will undoubtedly be created. I think technology, does enable people to offload, mundane tasks, not just manual jobs, by the way, but jobs in the office as well, which release people to operate at a higher level. But to your point, in terms of equality, that's why I think it's really important that we ensure that everybody in the community is given access to tools and training, and that people, leaders in industry and organisations look to actually prepare people whose jobs may be impacted to be ready to take on different jobs and provide them the digital skills to do that.
Interesting, thanks. It's a great question from Ed Person, who's talking about the responsibilities that businesses may have and leaders have towards making sure something that Kizzy touched on, making sure that people in the workplace feel protected and enabled to turn off and disconnect from work. And I remember being utterly shocked this is going back 5 or 6 years, that with a business with several thousand employees, we decided to give everybody iPhones. And, I'd say most people thought, which is what we'd hoped, when, yay, we've got an iPhone, that's fantastic. Quite at the time, it shocked me the number of people who thought that this was a plot to sort of get monitor them round the clock, or make sure they were working harder, or enable them to take calls at 10 at night. So there's a real balance between sort of putting this technology and sort of framework in place for people to work from home, but then still giving them boundaries. I'd love to hear from all of you, but Kizzy, maybe you kick us off. What responsibilities first do we have as leaders?
You mean the giving of iPhones wasn't to monitor 24/7?
Well, I didn't.
Well, I mean, look, I'm probably one of the worst people to speak personally, because I am one of those that does do kind of the almost 24-hour working. But from a legal point of view, from a health and safety point of view, businesses and senior leaders absolutely do have a responsibility to ensure that they are creating that balance and ensuring that employees feel that balance. So it's not just enough to say our policy isn't that you should work as often as possible or feel like you're always accessible, even if you're working at home. It's more about, does the employee know that, and what steps have you taken to ensure that they are reassured that they are not expected to be accessible in sort of late evening time, for example. That responsibility comes as part of your overarching duty to ensure the health. When they talk about health, safety and welfare, maybe park welfare for now, but when they talk about health and safety, it isn't just the physical safety of your employees, which is what's been the focus for many years. I think for the last 3, 4, even 5 years, there's been much more of a shift towards the occupational softer side of safety, which is much more focused on mental health and well-being. And if somebody feels that as part of their work activity, because they've been given all this technology or they've been given all these tools to enable them to work efficiently, and they have somehow concluded that means I've got to work late into the night, or I'm receiving emails late at night and therefore I'm expected to respond, then something's gone wrong in the communication between employer and employee. So I think if you're going to fulfill that duty that you have to look after the health of your staff or your workforce or people that work with you, part of that is going to be either making sure you've got adequate policies in place to enable employees to feel that they don't have to work excessively or work so far in excess of the hours that they would if they were in an office environment. But if they are working differently, then making sure that they're doing that safely. And that also means not working 20 hours a day. It's working efficiently, and if they can't work efficiently for a few hours a day as they would in an office, then you've got to change the policy and procedure, and that might mean working from home doesn't work. So you've really got to adapt it to the group of employees or even the employee that you're dealing with. But that's definitely a business responsibility, but partly employee responsibility too.
Well, actually, role modeling is big in this as well, isn't it? Because I mean, we all know leaders who sort of demand answers at 2 a.m, and we all know they're hopefully widely acknowledged as better examples of people who say, I might send you an email at a stupid time, but please don't reply. Or my daughter's company, actually, I think this is increasing. Well, just started having, I forget whether it's Wednesdays or Fridays, but, email traffic banned. They're all working from home, but they've banned email traffic on certain days. So I think some experimentation and some reasonableness and role modeling is probably in order.
I think it's really good. And one quick tip that I learned when I started working from home quite routinely, even if leaders are saying, please don't answer this, before tomorrow, you'll still feel, I think there's still a feeling that you might have to respond. Use that delay email button. So even if you, as a senior leader, is sending an email out at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, it will not be sent until the next morning. I think that's better than saying, don't answer this, because employees still feel perhaps under a bit of pressure to respond.
Let me invite Natalie or Ian, and if you don't have to, but if there's anything to add.
I think it's a really great point, because in my experience, most people who work from home work hard and put themselves under pressure. Sometimes feel they need to not take breaks because they're not at work, as it were. So I think giving them permission and role modeling, as you say, that that leaders take breaks, and leaders leading break time with their teams, I think is very powerful.
And actually, there's a direct follow-on question to that from Neil Moscrop, who's saying, is there any evidence that people working from home are more likely to carry on working when they're unwell, whereas they might not have gone into the office? Natalie, I don't know whether that's featured in your research. I mean, people taking time off and not taking time off in an office environment. Have you seen anything of that? Mute.
Still on mute.
Thank you. Not necessarily around the sickness piece. That's not something that we are focusing on in our research, but I think a lot of this comes down to as well us all learning how to use our tools better around our team's chat functions and stuff like that, and perhaps putting ourselves when we're in meetings or when we're not available for chat, and this idea that there is some benefit when people are in the office around sickness or around training and those sorts of things. If you see someone's not at their desk, you therefore don't email them, you therefore don't chat to them, you understand that they're not there. So I think there's something around how we can use these online communication platforms as well to demonstrate those same sort of physical prompts that we would have had in the office. I think all of us, even when we perhaps go to our lunch break, our Teams thing probably still says available, or it probably it's not necessarily set to different elements to let other people know that you're out. So I think perhaps there's a two-way there. In terms of the actual sickness piece, I'm not sure. I do think there will be a different trend when we do go back to the office. I think coming to the office with a cold, coming to the office sick, as perhaps with that presenteeism culture in the past, I don't think that will be there in the future.
People are going to be very worried about turning up with any respiratory symptoms. Kizzy, are you seeing anything on people worrying about sort of illness at home but being forced to work or encouraged to work?
Again, from some of the research that's been undertaken from some of the consultancy firms that I've worked with, they have suggested that employees are kind of trying to struggle through sickness just to make sure they're getting their hours down and getting the work done, because there is still this old-fashioned view from some businesses that if you're working from home, you've almost got to work over and above what you would do in the office, and that might mean working through sickness. I think the way in which businesses can overcome that is again by communication and encouraging employees to not do more than you would in an office in terms of working through an illness, but just having that confidence and reassurance and ability to approach your line managers and simply say, I'm not well. I therefore can't work today. I'm really sorry about that. And there shouldn't really be any different approach from an employer's perspective when it comes to somebody working from home as opposed to working from an office, because actually with the use of technology and with the use of your policies, that should be quite transparent now, and hopefully that old-fashioned view is few and far between, as now, as opposed to what we used to think of in the past.
Fingers crossed. Ian, you wanted to come in?
I was just agreeing actually that I think it comes as much from the employee as from the leader, and so the leader role modeling is critical from my side.
There's something that's crossed my mind before, a thought from Clive Memmott, who's saying really what we saw a year ago, a lot of sort of disguised deficiencies in a sense, working from home and stuff. There was some setup costs, but organisations were hoping to get some efficiencies from it. But actually, in reality, are some organisations struggling because of the cost of managing a dispersed workforce? And actually, is it more difficult in practice to get efficiencies? And maybe, Natalie, that's why people are or employers are reluctant to sort of lose they might redesign the office, but they're reluctant to see the end of it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm not going to say all, but a lot of organizations have reported higher levels of efficiency, now that we've had, let's say, a full financial year to be able to look at productivity. But the question is, what about those who've lost out on a year of training and development? What about those more junior staff? And actually, in a few years' time, is that when you'll start to see the lag of, everyone sort of, perhaps senior people have, that just got their hands dirty and done things rather than training and mentoring, which is obviously something that is, virtually can be more challenging. So I think there's still definitely a role for the office in terms of making sure that people are continually learning, and that people who are being onboarded are being trained in the correct way to make sure that actually efficiencies continue in future years.
Ian, do you see the technology side driven by efficiency, or is it just people keeping up, or is it facilitating better workplace, or all of those things?
I think it's heavily towards the facilitating the workplace, giving people the tools to have a great experience, whether they're at home or in the office. I think one of the things that is certainly lost when everybody is remote is the team building, the strategic work, the development, the training, and that's why I think the model of getting back to offices for at least some time of the week or the month is really important. But no, in terms of technology, clearly there is an efficiency element to it, but I think actually having more tools gives you more options of how to get things done, and that's always a positive thing, in my opinion.
Great. There's some questions come in about something. I can't remember, Kizzy, whether you used the actual word, but when you were addressing the subject of, you're often asked about whether employers should go into employees' homes and sort of check their table is safe, or their electrical socket is safe, and all that sort of stuff. And I think you made a point in layman's terms that do the right thing, do a reasonable right thing there, show you care and do something. But just help us, because I'm often asked this, and we've had a specific question about it. Define reasonableness like that. Is there, is it just a sort of what a man in the street would do? Is it what how do employers grasp that, particularly small businesses that are stretched? How do they grasp that reasonableness?
It's a good question, and there's been lots and lots of cases around this. But in a short form, for the purposes of health and safety, when it comes to reasonableness, or what's known as reasonable practicability, it's about a cost-benefit analysis, really. So it's about spending, how much money is spent versus the level of risk you're about to mitigate. So you wouldn't necessarily spend £1 million on redesigning your office if you are simply going to address the risk to 20 people. It wouldn't be comparative, it wouldn't be comparable, and it wouldn't be reasonable in those circumstances if you were applying a cost benefit analysis. But it's really about that, looking at the time taken to implement measures, the money spent versus the level of risk that you are going to mitigate. And that's really the definition for the purposes of health and safety. When it comes to going round to people's houses, we'd say for the large majority, it's actually unreasonable to expect an employer to visit the homes of over 50 people. Let's say for your average employer, going around to the homes of over 50 people would be deemed unreasonable. What is more reasonable, as I say, is to conduct a remote risk assessment and give employees the tools that they need to conduct their own ongoing risk assessment, and highlight any issues if they feel appropriate and feel free to speak to their employer about. And that's where the reasonableness comes in. Communication is quite easy, but going physically to people's homes is probably not. You're still on mute, Simon.
Hands on mute, I think.
I was just saying I wasn't sure whether I was turning it off or on, but now I'm sure. Thank you. Ed's followed up his earlier question saying, embracing flexible working, hybrid working, is that a competitive advantage to businesses? Natalie, what do you think? Is actually, whether that's for recruitment, whether it's in customers?
I would say yes. Across all of the surveys that either we've been doing with organizations or, organizations we've been working with, if they've been doing themselves, the desire to be able to work from the office 2 to 3 days a week and have the flexibility those other 2 days is coming across, that everyone has that appetite. I do think I don't know that it's a competitive advantage if you offer that. I think perhaps it's the opposite of a competitive advantage if you say that someone needs to be in the office 5 days a week and don't give them flexibility. But I do think we've all proven that we can work from home and have a level of autonomy, and there is a strong appetite to have that moving forward. In my experience, I'm seeing a low level of appetite for full home working. That's just not, the people are, especially after all this time at home, but people really are looking forward to getting back to the office. Younger people, especially, you see that the younger people are, the more they crave that. The office is a fun place. I think if we, work can be boring and, work can be transactional and it can be busy and it can be stressful, but actually the office is a pretty fun place, especially when you're younger. You make loads of friends, so people do want to go back. But yes, it will be a disadvantage not to offer it, perhaps.
I agree. And David Mallard has asked, main differences, if there are any, between the way that government and public sector employers and private sector organisations are handling hybrid working. I'm on the board of the Royal Air Force and would have paid tribute to how well I feel they've done in terms of, in some ways, I think, being more thoughtful and caring and observant and role modelling around some of the practices and safety things. I mean, Kizzy, do you see government generally setting a standard?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think a lot more in the public sector have been, I suppose, exposed to a bit more public scrutiny in terms of the way in which they have adapted to flexible working, hybrid working. A lot of them have come up with their flexible and agile working policies well in advance of the COVID pandemic. Some private companies, perhaps the larger companies who have the resource, who are forward thinking in terms of the way in which they could use that way of working more effectively and profitably, if that was appropriate, have adapted quite easily. But I think certainly in the public sector, a lot of them were well ahead of the game when it came to hybrid working.
I agree. So we're short on time now. So I'm just going to wrap up. I'm going to just give my gratuitous 20 seconds worth of what I think work's going to look like in 5 years' time. Then I'm going to ask each of the panelists, literally 20 seconds, what's the world going to look like 5 years' time? My prediction is we'll return to about 70 to 80% occupancy of offices, but that will be more complicated because it'll be a mixture of probably 120% of today's people, but working sort of a mixed pattern of working. I think tech's going to get increasingly important, and people are going to be basically, you're not going to know where people are or where they're functioning from, and we'll have a mix of physical and remote. I think, like Natalie said, people will cherish real world meetings and water coolers and social life and office environment again. And I hope we don't get back to a full level, for the planet's sake and sanity's sake, a full level of travel and meetings and everything else, but get back to some of it. That's me. Sorry. Ian, go on. Over to you.
Yeah, I agree with you on the mix. I think from a capability of getting work done, I think we'll be closer to actually being able to get work done almost from anywhere at any time, because the friction of connecting and getting access to the tools and data and the apps that we need, who knows what generational leaps will be made in 5 years' time. And I think that will lend itself to how people prefer to work, where they work best, what environment they thrive in. But there will be a headquarter office type function where people come together as part of their organizational family.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. Kizzy?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I've got a list of, we'll still have offices because I think there's absolutely a benefit to have offices and have team, as we're calling in our office, team days, because we just want that face-to-face contact with people. You can't miss, you can't work without that. Even more technology, which will be seamless in 5 years' time. As you say, we're not going to even know where people are working from. We'll have true hybrid mixed working practices. I'm not sure if it will be 70-30. It might even be a bit more split than that. But I think we'll never go back to 100% in the office. And I don't think we have an appetite for 100% home working. So I agree with all of the initiatives taking place, like Paperlight, like more reliance on video conferencing. Health and safety compliance is going to become even better in 5 years.
Thank you. Natalie, closes down. Final comments for you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with all of your comments. I agree that the office is by no means dead. I think, if anything, it's a place for connection. It's a place for collaboration. It's a place for your culture of your organization. I see in 5 years' time also the workplace being somewhere we can be our more genuine selves. I think we've recognized throughout the last year that, you know, well-being in people's lives are much more holistic than just the 8 hours that they clock onto the office. And I think we've all recognized that about each other. So I do think when you come to the office in 5 years' time, you know, it will be more about well-being. It will be about, you know, mental well-being. It will be about understanding everybody's different perspectives, and, you know, recognizing that in quite a diverse space. And I think recognizing all of those things will as I said, I think the office is a fun place, and I think it will continue to be a fun place.
End on a human and high note. So listen, thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Kizzy. Great panel discussion. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And that's the end of our webinar. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.